Okay, so this is a devlog update for the application I've been working on, and just to recap, the goal is to make a multiplayer 3D browser game, probably I think is what I'm going to go for, and then an application that kind of just sits around it. So right now I've just been working on a lot of the social logic for like friend requests, messaging, online presence, and stuff like that. And I think after this is kind of all ironed out, I'm going to probably move on to either group message functionality, potentially like matchmaking kind of stuff for like connecting into game lobbies, or the actual like game itself. So there's a lot of stuff that obviously needs to be done, and I'm trying to prioritize, whatever I'm interested in, and then just whatever needs to get done. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and demo what I have currently. There was a few changes that I made since the last devlog, and it's specifically in regards to, well, one, the implementation of this social side nav. I switched to using more of like a global state management logic in terms of like how I'm dealing with all the data, and I made some backend changes as well. And then I also did add some new features to like these friends lists and things like that. So I'll kind of walk through what's currently here. So as we can see right now, I'm currently logged into two different users. I'm logged into Senjoku over here, Senjoku over here in the middle, and then Peanut on the right. And then you can see that there's a friends list now. It's a combined friend list. Before it was separated by online and offline, but I decided to just put them all into one friends list and then essentially perform some sorting logic to where the online users always come up at the top and then the offline users come at the bottom. And then, yeah, so you can see that Peanut can see that, Senjoku can see that Peanut's online and Peanut can see that Senjoku's online. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log in as Mintowl, who is a friend of both of these users, as we can see right here. And then upon me logging in, you'll see that Mintowl jumps to the top now. So that's one thing I added, which I didn't have before, I don't think, was if a user logs in, they're always going to be pushed down to the top of the list, so to speak. And then just so you can see who is online like the easiest, if that makes sense. Like if somebody comes online, you want to see that they're online. You don't want them to stay down at the bottom of the list. So users that hop online will always move to the top now. And then if we look at Mintowl's view, so I'll open up his little tab here, you can see some kind of more important stuff going on. And this is some of the logic that I've been working on. Okay, so one of the things you'll see is that I have two messages from Senjoku. Those are unviewed messages. So there's this concept of viewed and unviewed messages. So you can see that he sent me two messages. I haven't viewed them. Peanut hasn't sent me any messages. And then there's Arshmazing, who has sent me two messages, but he's offline. So there's a sorting algorithm that I put in place now for when you log in. So upon initialization, this list is always going to sort. It's going to initialize and then sort by online with messages, online without messages, offline with messages, and then just the rest of the users, which are offline users. And the reasoning behind this is because you probably want to see who's online and who's sending you messages first. Then you probably just want to generally see who's online, and then followed by, yeah, you probably want to see of the offline users, has anyone sent me messages? And you want to see those at the top in like a nice sorted order. So that's always going to happen when you log in. And once you can still move this list around and do stuff like that. So if I go here, I can actually click into Senjoku, and then I can see this is another feature that I added or some fixed. So now the messages show up in like date order. So I changed the data structure to be like a map to where the keys are the dates of the messages. So all the messages get grouped by date and sorted in a map. So you can iterate over the keys basically of the dates and then get all the messages associated to that date for a given friend. So you'll see okay, on November 5th, there's hello, hey. And then I also color coded the who's sending versus who's receiving. It's now like gray and purple, whereas before it was just like all purple. So yeah, you can see a bunch of spam messages I was doing to test this out. Like, can you come over, Joe, later, please? Yeah, random stuff like that. And then yeah, you can see it's grouped by date. So October 26th, keep going, and eventually you get to November 5th. So yeah, some minor tweaks also to how the UI looks, but nothing crazy. So if I go ahead and collapse that down, you'll see that it marked it as viewed, so there's no longer a red dot that's appearing here, like a red notification. So another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move Senjoku down here, and then I'm going to go to Senjoku and then proceed to send Mintowl like a message. Hello. So what you'll notice happens is there's some more sorting logic here, so that basically moves users that send messages always to the top. So kind of similarly to how when a user logs in, it should move them to the top of other people's friends lists. It's the same thing with like messaging. So if somebody sends you a message, they're always going to be moved to the top of your list so you can see what's going on. And then like the same thing here with Peanut. Like if Peanut was to suddenly also message Mint Owl sub, then he also now moves to the top, and you'll see that there's 3 users that have sent messages. So pretty much just all of that sorting logic I had to get figured out, and like dealing with all of these events of like online and offline and stuff like that. And then also for friend requests, I have notifications set up so where if you have notification, like if you have people sending you friend requests, they'll go to here, and then this is always going to be collapsed, I think, by default, just to preserve space, and then it will show with like a little notification of how many friend requests you have. So I can either reject or accept these. And then there's also this tab up here. So there's the friends tab, and then I'm planning on having a groups tab where all group message stuff is going to be. It's going to look very similar to the friends tab. It's just going to be dealing with like group messages. And you can see now that there's a notification here that if you're out of the view, like if you're on the groups tab, let's say, then let's say even Mint Owl sends, let's say I send Mint Owl a message again, hello, it'll update this count. And then this count is basically the aggregate count of all messages per each friend plus the friend requests. And then the theory being like, I think I'm always going to persist this value at the top. I don't ever really want to wipe this value out. It's just going to always kind of have a value if there's notifications sent to you. Whereas like these ones are able to be marked as viewed. So if I like click into Peanut's message history, chat history, it'll like actually mark that as viewed. And that does indeed affect the account up here. But yeah, so just like dealing with all of that logic of like sorting, initializing the list in the proper way, like handling events like online activity and sending of messages, and then dealing with like the notifications is kind of what I've been working on this entire time. And then once again, I have like my normal job too, so I have to work on this sparingly. But that's pretty much the update, I would say, in terms of functionality that you guys can see. But it was a lot of changes, and this is why it took so long, of like how the like state management is working. And I actually drew up a little diagram here, so I'll jump over to that. So yeah, basically this is the new architecture of how state is managed in my application. Okay. So before it was like this, it was basically like a UI component would just inject in an API service, get the data from the API, like from the backend, and then it would like prop drill that data down essentially into all the components that need that data. Like so, for example, you'd have a UI component that requests friend data or friends, and it gets the friends, and it passes it down. The problem with that is if you need to share that data elsewhere, it can become a nightmare if you're managing state within a UI component, and it's also very, very difficult if you're passing state down multiple components, because if you have to modify like data at the very childmost component, like you have to make sure that that propagates all the way back up to the top, or that you have to make sure that it gets emitted back all the way to the top so that the state is not out of sync. And I've had problems with that in the past when using a more like rudimentary approach. So I decided to finally like look into global state management logic, which I had usually avoided. And then this is what I arrived at for now. So once again, I'm using Angular on the front end, and then I'm not using any global state management libraries. I've just done all of this using the observables that Angular has to offer, and I'm essentially like just having a file that can be accessed anywhere in the application, or multiple files that can be accessed anywhere in the application. But the general flow is you have a UI component which can inject in like basic services if you want. So that could be like a friend service, a message service, user service, whatever really. And then that service injects in effects service and state service. So the effects are kind of for dealing with like API related stuff, because the effects service, actually, I didn't draw it out here, but the effects service has an API service. So like the API service is responsible solely for making requests to an API and getting data. The effects service uses that API service and then is able to modify state. And then there's like the state service, obviously, which is specifically for modifying state on the front end. And then this service is kind of like like a facade service that combines these together so I can expose everything in a nice, clean, and neat way for the UI component. But where things were getting a little bit tricky is where if I needed to do like operations, like for example, if I needed to add a friend, that requires me to not only add the friend, but it requires me to get all the messages between the user and that friend if they had them before. It requires me to update like friend requests Like I need to remove any inbound, outbound friend requests and stuff like that. So it's like multiple state operations happening at once. So for those more complex kind of operations, I opted for this thing which I'm calling like an orchestrator service, which essentially is just like a more like compound service that can inject in these other services. So as like like for example, you would inject in like the message service, friend service, and friend request service all into this orchestrator service, and then it can deal with all of the operations as it needs. Like, hey, add this friend. Okay, once you're done adding the friend, make sure you go and remove any of the friend requests like that need to be removed. Okay, and then get the messages and store them in state, like all that kind of stuff that's going to be happening. Okay, so my mic cut out for like the last few minutes of whatever it was I was trying to explain, so I have to re-record this part. Basically, I was gonna go through the code, but I think that's maybe too getting into the weeds of things, and I'll just kind of keep these videos as like demo only, and then maybe some like high-level diagrams of any architectural changes, um, and then just like talk about those things only. If there's a need or a desire for like actually seeing the code as it's written, and then maybe walking through the code in a more detailed way, I might maybe I can make an extra like playlist of videos specifically for that are different than these videos. That's even if there's a demand for people once again to even see anything related to like the I don't know like the state management logic or the logic for connecting into like using socket connections for all the online presence and stuff like that. So yeah, if there is a need for that or a desire for that, I'll maybe think about doing that. But for the interest of time, I'll just go ahead and show, the demo and then high-level architectural changes via like a diagram or something, and then that's pretty much it for now. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got. So the goal moving forward is going to be either working on group message logic, which is pretty fresh in my mind, so I might go into that, especially now that I got all this state management stuff kind of ironed out. It should be a little bit faster. Or potentially some like matchmaking logic. So eventually there's going to be a screen where you're going to need to have the functionality of like joining into people's games, right? Whether it be like a game type or your friend specifically has a game up and running and you want to connect into that. There's going to be a lot of logic around just matchmaking in general. So I might look into that next. Then there's of course the actual game, like the actual game code that needs to be developed, and then the like online connectivity and all. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of like multiplayer networking logic that I'm gonna have to figure out, like client-side prediction, entity interpolation, server reconciliation, like all these concepts that I've been researching into that I've never had experience with. So that's also on my radar. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh yeah, potentially like Stripe integration. So I'm probably gonna use like Stripe for payment stuff, and that's something I've never worked with before. Although I'm kind of working with that now in my actual like work. So I might kind of go into like a payment processing kind of feature. So these are kind of the things that are on my mind right now. Um, and yeah, I'll get working on those. And if I have any updates, I'll post them here. And yeah, that's all I got. Peace.